Well, welcome back. So we are going to talk about regulating business. Big pens are great. All right, so, why would, our friends in economics would say, well, the market functions the best when there's no government interference and all that kind of stuff. And those of us in management say, well, maybe the government, does need to kind of step in a little bit. And so it asks the question, well, why? Why do we need to regulate business? And there's two reasons, okay? When the market does not function, as our friends in economics would say, when the market in some way has a flaw that has led to undesirable consequences, when Adam Smith's base assumption has failed and businesses no longer exercise moral restraint, as Adam Smith always said they did, okay, then the government would need to step in, okay? And of course, when there are sufficient reasons from a government or societal perspective to create and enforce regulations. Now, I've talked about this in a couple lectures before. Business, government, and society kind of have this kind of pull on each other. And so when businesses fail to live up to the expectations of society, then of course societal actors or government actors can kind of step in. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does kind of that interplay between business, government, and society. Okay? So when business fails to live up to its moral responsibilities in the eyes of society, then government has an obligation as a representative of society to step in and make sure that societal interests are taken care of. I'm going to run down and turn on the lights and be right back. Okay, and we're back. So, let's talk about these flaws in the market. Okay, flaws in the market. Well, the first one is a natural monopoly. Okay. And of course, as our friends in economics would say, monopolies don't really exist or they're bad. Okay. So what is a natural monopoly? A natural monopoly basically means that in certain circumstances, it is more advantageous for one firm to produce the entire output in a certain good or industry. Let me try to think of some examples. Well, how about industries that have tremendous economies of scale? Okay, remember we talked about would have tremendous economies of scale. Think of like oil or retail or these kinds of things. So this would be an example of a natural monopoly. Another thing that you might think of, for example, some things are not able to be replicated and therefore should be regulated. Think about a certain space of land where an individual could build a market or something like that, or a store. That space of land cannot be replicated, and therefore the government may step in to regulate it to make sure whoever has that natural monopoly behaves in the interests of a broader societal interest. So again, it could be when someone has a resource that is impossible to replicate and therefore there's no competition, okay, such as a piece of land. It could also be a trademark, a copyright, an image, a certain knowledge or know-how, okay? But it could also be because certain industries have tremendous economies of scale. Okay? We've also got destructive competition. Destructive competition basically means that certain businesses behave in such a way that is not necessarily in the interest of their competitors or even of broader society. Here's a great example. When I was a kid, and I won't name the major corporation, but when I was a kid, we had this neighborhood market called Fazio's. And Fazio's was kind of your local corner store, and it sold groceries, right? And Fazio's had a pretty good niche on the market. Again, people in a small town, they didn't want to drive, so they could just walk to Fazio's and get their groceries. Okay? However, a major food retailer came to our town, and what did they do? They priced goods at their store below what it cost to make them. Okay? So they drove the prices so low that Fazio's could no longer compete, and Fazio's went out of business. Okay? So, for example, you can price goods so low that it undermines competition. There is a large international retailer that has a habit of this as well. They go to a new country, and I'm sure some of you know who I'm talking about. They go to a new country, they undercut all the local competition by charging less in the stores than it costs to produce them, and it drives the local competition out of business. Okay? Of course, on an international trade level, you also have the issue of dumping. Okay? That's typically when a certain company benefits from government subsidies, and then they're able to export goods into a foreign market, okay, at a price that is below the cost of production. Okay? That's, again, destructive competition. And so the government might want to intervene to make sure that there is healthy competition between businesses and things like destructive competition don't happen. Okay? And we've also got externalities. Made a wrong stroke here. Externalities. Okay, so we typically think of positive externalities and negative externalities. Okay, now externalities are something that individuals can benefit or be harmed by, and they didn't really contribute to it in any way. So think, for example, let's say you live in a rural community somewhere in the Northeast, and you have clean water and nice forests, and some company comes in and they start dumping chemicals in the water and they start polluting, and then next thing you know, you go fishing and the fish come out and they have 3 heads and you can't breathe the air anymore. Okay, that's an example of a negative externality. You didn't ask for that company to be there, you didn't have anything to do with that, but you're being punished by their actions. Okay, that's a negative externality. Okay. Think about maybe something a little more mundane. Let's say you live in a quiet neighborhood, everything is great, and then a convenience store is built. Okay? Now you have issues with extra traffic near where you live, you can't park on the street like you used to, those kinds of things. Also a negative externality. Now there's also positive externalities, right? Think about public transport being built through your neighborhood. Well, you didn't really pay the city to do that. I mean, I guess you did in some way through taxes, but you really didn't pay the city to do that. But now, of course, it's more convenient for you to go to a variety of places or do a variety of things that you couldn't necessarily do in a way before. That's an example of a positive externality. Think about you have children, and an elementary school is now built in your area, and it's a great elementary school. Now your kid can walk to school and get a better education than before. Also an example of a positive externality. Or your favorite grocery store is built a couple blocks down. Now you don't have to fight LA traffic to get there. Also a positive externality. Okay? So the government typically doesn't intervene for positive externalities, but they do intervene for negative externalities. And they want to make sure, again, thinking about, like we talk about norms of distributive justice, okay, that corporations bear some of the burden that they're imposing on society and their neighbors via positive externalities. So the government would need to intervene for that. And then, of course, you have inadequate information. Okay, inadequate information. So again, our friends in classical economics assume that all customers are, informed and make the perfectly rational decision at all times. Okay. Now, under inadequate information, we know this isn't always true. I mean, you think about it. I mean, some things you can always make good comparisons. Okay, an ounce of gold should always be an ounce of gold. I mean, that's pretty non-negotiable. But what if you go to the grocery and you look at two kinds of milk? Well, what are the ingredients? Is that organic? Is it 2%? Does that have this or that in it? It's hard to make the comparison, right? As a customer, we're not always perfectly informed. Well, the government can intervene to make sure that that information is provided. Think about nutrition labels, for example. Well, now I can actually look at the milk and say, well, I like this milk a little better. It's got less fat and more protein, and this other stuff has, some chemical in it I can't pronounce as a preservative. So now I can make an informed decision. I may realize that the preservative is in the milk and it might be harmful to me, but it's cheaper, so I can make the decision to buy it. But either way, the choice is mine. I have more information. So the government performs an essential function of making sure that customers can be informed. Okay? I'm looking at our time, so we're going to stop here for the moment, and we'll pick it up on the next clip.